Thank you so much for attending today. For you guys that don't know who I am Jason Foyer. I'm the current chair of the Economic Resource Council. And on behalf of the board and all of our membership, I would like to say thank you and welcome to the annual Economic Summit. I think it's a great turnout. We sold out once again this year. So I think that's a good sign that what we're doing here with these presenters is something that's of value to our members, to the community. And again, we appreciate you guys coming. We have several goals today. One of them is to educate you. The other one is to get you fed, and the other one is to get you back to work on time. So the presentations on my behalf and others will be brief, and we're going to give the majority of the time to our presenters. And I can see Supervisor Miller just shaking his head saying thank you. So again, the other three goals tonight are to entice, entertain, and to educate. And can you guys hear me? Okay, terrific. Thought somebody, yeah? Okay. So with that said, I want to take a real brief, give you a real brief update on some of the things that the ERC is doing currently. Many of you guys have heard, we don't currently have an executive director, and that is currently by choice. We took the direction of taking the monies that we would typically have to pay for an executive director, and we're funneling those into consultants. Up here in the foothills, as most of us employers know, it's sometimes difficult to find that one person that can wear all of the hats that we need them to wear. You got to be an economic developer. You got to be somebody that's an expert in business and finance. You got to be somebody that can go out and recruit. Having one person wear all of those hats can be such a challenge. So the board has chosen to, rather than do that, to hire consultants. So we've hired Sierra Business Council. They're currently increasing their hours here to provide business consulting. It's been a win-win, fabulous, hopefully fabulous for the community and those people that are currently using the services. Secondly, we've hired a professional 310 Limited to do our business recruiting. These are the types of folks that have a list of folks that know are relocating or looking to relocate from other areas. And we've hired those folks not only to go out and recruit for us, but they're guaranteeing a certain sit-down. We have to sit down with these folks that are looking to relocate. They're actually interested in it versus us constantly fishing. So those types of services and those types of consultants have been really a new approach for the ERC. With that said, it's also put an extra burden upon the board members. You guys don't know that the Economic Resource Council is primarily ran by volunteers. We have one paid superhero, Janet Augustine, who also put together this event for us. But the most important thing that the ERC does is that the ERC creates a platform for a variety of folks to sit around and have robust discussions. We have business leaders, community leaders, elected officials, policy makers, and we get to sit around a table once a month and have what we'd hope to be robust discussions on how do we make our community better in the economic development world. And I'd also like to encourage you, we have some openings on our board. So we are looking for some different sectors. If you guys are and those folks that may be on some of the other fringe sectors, I encourage you to apply and come down and talk to us. We'd like to have a very diverse board to encourage those robust discussions. Before I get too far along, I'd like to thank our title sponsors, Owens Estate and Wealth Strategies Group, the City of Grass Valley, Sierra College, co-title sponsor, Zap Manufacturing, gold sponsor, Dignity Health, Sierra Nevada Memorial Hospital. Program sponsors, Nevada County Association of Realtors, and Cramner Engineering. With that, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Grass Valley's mayor, Mr. Howard Levine, for a brief welcome. After when Howard's done, food's going to come out, and then the next, we'll actually have our presenter after lunch. And then we'll get into hopefully there'll be a few minutes for some questions and answers. But we're going to get you out of here at 1:30 and get you back to work. So we know no economic development is happening when we're all in this room. Mr. Howard Levine.
Thank you very much. And it's an honor and a privilege to be here and to welcome you. I was thinking about it this morning. And for me to be at this podium amongst this diverse, opinionated group is just something I never thought could happen 40 years ago. And I want to thank you on behalf of our city for the investments and the time that you put in. As Jason said, we're here to entice, entertain, and educate us. And when I squint my eyes and look out as an artist, I bring all the colors in the spectrum together to try and create something that people can recognize and may be beautiful, that moves them, that has a visceral, you might have a positive, very positive reaction to, and that it is something that you want to live with for the rest of your life. So as we gather as a group and we think about this community, the quality of this community, the respect that each one of us has for each other, and the future that we can provide for our community, it is a group like this coming together, working on shared values that will make it the rainbow of the future. And I really hope that I know we will garner a lot of information today. And on behalf of the City of Grass Valley, we're really pleased you're all here. Thank you very much.
I am very pleased today to be able to introduce not only an outstanding economist, but also a very dear friend. I have known David Roland Holst now for about 10 years. And one of the unusual attributes of David, he also is a part-time Nevada Countian. So he is a professor of economics at UC Berkeley, and I'll get into some of his accomplishments in a moment. But I also want you to realize that he actually owns a home in the Middle Fork of the Yuba for the last 25 years. So he is very familiar with our community, and he is one of those weekend escapees out of the Bay Area. I completely sympathize. I left during the 1980 BART strike, so I understand. So when he is not stalking his beloved Yuba, looking for trout, he keeps his day job as a professor emeritus at UC Berkeley. He is a leading authority on agricultural economics and environmental economics. He has authored 5 books and over 100 articles and publications in professional journals and books. He has served several academic posts in the United States, Europe, and Asia. They're very diverse. They're amazing. We first met David when I was looking for a speaker to do an on-point series on the development of China and the various issues of shortages of water, the leverage of debt, and trying to convert from an export economy to an internally driven consumption economy. And when I started to talk to various economists, they all kept on saying, there is one person in this nation that you should be speaking to, and he is with us today, Professor Roland Holst. He was the one that more than 15 professors said, this is the person you need to have as your guest speaker. Now, what's unusual about David, his diverse experiences across the globe have given him an unusual ability to spot developing issues in small communities. It is not just the United States that has issues like Nevada County, where we're all looking to be able to add diversity to our economy and strengthen our base, and most importantly, keep our highs and lows more moderate when we come to economic recessions and boom periods. So in his studies, he has negotiated both bilateral and multilateral development agreements, including with the food and ag under the United Nations. He's also worked with the Asian Development Bank, the UN development programs. He's worked with the World Bank, the Inter-American Development Bank, and many, many others. I won't sit there and list them all out. They're very substantive. He has a PhD in economics, and we'd like you to welcome David. He is from UC Berkeley, both as a graduate and as a professor, and our wonderful guest speaker today.
I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk to all of you about a place that's very near to my heart. I've got 4 kids, and they all grow up with very rich memories of the Yuba and this whole beautiful area. I feel very fortunate to have been able to bring them here almost every weekend during their early childhood. And even though they may be more metropolitan at heart in a way, they're always going to carry the memories of the time that they've spent up here. But I think about this issue of my kids and the community itself because it's really at the root of what I want to talk to you about today. The constraints and the opportunities for the county are crucially linked to demographics, and that's really one of the main themes that I'd like to cover today. Mary asked me to talk about both challenges and opportunities. I'll try to strike a balance. And I come away from my thoughts and my research about this issue really quite optimistic, but it's going to require a fairly determined effort on the part of the community to overcome some of the challenges that I think it's facing. Here we go. Let's see. Okay. I'll cover 4 basic topics. The first one is this issue of demographics. I was tempted to paraphrase a presidential campaign and say, it's the people, stupid, but of course you don't address an audience that way and expect to stay at the podium. So it's really about the people. I mean, absolutely, developing the community is going to be economically feasible if the demographics can be developed. And I'll talk about that in some detail. Then I'm going to talk about commercial policy, which is a strategic approach to this, and then the role of the public sector in supporting that development, which I'm sure is near to the hearts of many entrepreneurs who have relocated here and tried to establish themselves. Also, marketing the community itself is an essential part of the story, and I'll get to that. I'm not a marketing consultant, but some of the needs are pretty apparent, and I just want to kind of re-emphasize them. Everything I say here is going to come in the way of suggestions, but I think there's some really important insights for all of you leaders and decision makers to reflect on in terms of where the really crucial changes and adjustments could be made to revitalize and establish more momentum for the community's economic growth. First of all, let's talk about this demographic transition. I'm being a little bit ironic here. I'm sorry for the dark humor, but retirement has been really important to the economy for a long time. It's protected them from what I guess I call a demographic endgame in other parts of the foothill regions and the rural areas generally, I mean around the world, but also in California, where you see just a sustained exodus of young people from rural areas into urban areas. The retirement dividend was really important to sustaining the economy, I think, around here. It also supported property values because of the incomes of retirees being on average higher than in rural communities generally. And then finally, it established the civic cohesion, which I think is really admirable in the Grass Valley and Nevada City area. It's a very diverse area in terms of civic customs and groups, but it's got a wonderful kind of vibrance and stability that goes along with it. And I think that the choices that people have made to spend their later years in this area have been really important to that, because stability is a priority for that group, and I think that they've helped to establish a really solid social foundation. But for the long term, sorry, the demographic challenge, I think, is really fundamental if the community wants to advance itself. So I'm going to get into some demographics, I mean, sort of from an academic perspective, and show you one of the most fundamental diagrams that's used in looking at demographics. This is called a population pyramid, and you may have seen one before, but what it shows, it's actually very informative for a single graph, and what it shows is population by age. Age is on the vertical axis, and then males are red and females are blue, and those are basically the size of each age group, going from the youngest in the population to the oldest in the population. And this is California, the state of California, from the state census in 1970 and 2017. You can see that the composition of the state's population has changed pretty significantly. You'll always see this tapering at the top for the obvious reason that the reaper comes. But at the bottom, things depend on much more complex things. Particularly, they depend on public health, mainly infant mortality, but they also depend upon customs. They depend on social customs and, you know, what I'm talking about. And it turns out in the 70s, California looked like the rest of the country, but since the 70s, there's been a kind of tapering of the younger population in terms of its share of the state population. So the average age has been rising. It's not an aging society per se, but there are definitely pockets of seniority, if you want to call it that, around the state. Before I go to the county, which is a really important step here, the first thing to notice is that you've got this kind of maturity of the population in California and a more uniform distribution. That's significant because it says a lot about not only the society, but its economic potential. And I'll contrast some national examples or some international examples for you so you can get a feeling for this. This is the United States as a whole. Now, that looks a bit like California, right? I mean, it isn't that different from what you just saw. This, by contrast, is an African country, East African country, Kenya. And what you see here is very typical of very low-income countries, especially those that don't have rigorous family planning policies. So that about half the population is under 16. Children are the majority, or young people are the majority of the population. And this may be very cheerful. I mean, it's wonderful to have kids around, but it actually exerts a real drag on economic growth because these people, most of them are not directly productive, and yet they have needs like everybody else. So this has always been a challenge for developing countries. And population policy is something that has been really important for countries to get beyond that. Of course, the paragon of economic transition these days is China, and I think many people know how China did it through a combination of entrepreneurship and very rigorous population policy. So you see this looks a lot more, it's even more extreme than California, in fact. There's a real narrowing at the base and a very large cohort of active working age people. Now, this is a huge benefit to the Chinese economy right now because they have the largest working population they're probably ever going to have again. But they're reaching a tipping point now where the low birth rates that have translated into a small share of young people are going to move them in the direction of another country, Japan, which is already recognized as a country with a, quote, aging problem. That is, there's the same difficulty of a dependent population, but at the other end of the age spectrum. And the question then is, how do you finance Social Security? How do you finance retirement? How do you have a productive workforce that can carry the burden of production in a large industrial or post-industrial economy? And Japan is really struggling with this right now. Japan's population is going to decline by 20% by 2050, but the composition is going to become even more dramatic. Okay? So these are kind of structural archetypes, if you will. They're different types of economies, and they face very different kinds of challenges because of their demographic structure. The U.S., I would say, is pretty balanced in a sense. The birth rate's not too high, not too low. It's kind of a Goldilocks situation, but that's on an average basis. What it means, though, is that the U.S. will be able to carry forward its economic growth with a large productive workforce, financing both young people's needs and older people's needs, without encountering any bottlenecks, significant bottlenecks demographically. Now let's go from let me just go back to California so you remember where we are in California now. It looks a bit like an average for the U.S., but it's even a little bit more kind of balanced up to higher middle age. Now let's compare that to the county of Nevada with the state census, folks. I'm sorry, this data is official. Now, everybody lies to census takers, but they usually lie in a kind of a uniform way. So most counties lie about the same way, the same problems of income and so on. But this is it. I mean, this is what the county looks like demographically. Now, this is really, I was really shocked when I got these numbers. But it's a very interesting challenge. Now, you can look at it kind of in detail at some of the specific characteristics, like If we look at the highest parts of the age population, the males are rather unlucky, but that's true around the world. Men don't survive as long as women on average. But if you're actually up here, you know, and you're living in this zone, you know, and if you can drive at night, you're going to have a really exciting social life. But that's some kind of comfort for you, but it's not helping the economy, okay? And so now this is what we kind of need to ask ourselves. How are we going to approach this challenge? Now, I'm gonna overlay the state as a whole to show you how much of a disparity there is between Nevada County, and this is East and West Nevada County, you know? It includes all those Lyft operators and everybody else, all those crazy young people that are up in the ski areas. But still, there's an incredibly narrow distribution here in the younger age groups. So what would that look like? Wow, can you see that? That's really light, huh? Oh. It doesn't look like that on here. Wow. All right. Let me try to show you what you're looking at. I'm going to just be emphatic about this. I'll raise my voice, all right? This is the California distribution. You see all this stuff out here? Okay, and over here, can you see the blue over here? Okay, good. Those are the girls and the boys, the young people that are not represented in the distribution for Nevada County. And so what I'm calling that gap at the lower levels is a demographic deficit. What it means is that the share of population in those younger groups is absent. It's just not in the county as a share. Never mind the numbers, the county is smaller than the state, blah, blah, blah. But it's a very different demographic structure. And I'll talk a little bit about why that's important, but let's assume that you wanted Nevada County to be more like California, and a little bit more anyway, to fill in some of this demographic deficit, get the structure. How would we do that? Because I'll tell you today, at least my belief is that is the most fundamental challenge. That and the incomes of the people that bring the children. But I said bring the children. Why did I say that? Because I'll tell you one way we're not going to solve this problem. I can see maybe in the audience, but definitely in the upper parts of this distribution, there are a significant number of people in the county who are familiar with the term the summer of love, okay? But frankly, if you use that term, it's not going to evoke memories of last summer for them, and probably also not next summer. By which I mean, we're not going to solve this problem alone. This community won't be able to solve it with its existing population, right? So we've got to think about other strategies, and the main strategy would be migration, trying to attract migrants to come to the county and bring with them a younger demographic and the capacity to produce a younger demographic. So how would that happen? I mean, there are definitely lots of young people in the community, but they can't reproduce fast enough to change the structure themselves, right? So this is really the fundamental challenge. Now, why do you want these people? Well, the answer is really quite simple. The underrepresentation in the lower age groups leads to a real narrowing of the consumer demand. That is, these groups have more diverse and they have more robust spending habits. They have higher, what we call spending propensities. That's what economists call the propensity to spend. They spend more money. They go into debt. Whereas in the higher age groups, they're more inclined to be saving. They also use a broader range of social, personal, and financial services than older age groups do. And a much broader spectrum of employment, not only for themselves, but also in the demand and the goods and services that they buy. So to get a more sustainable and inclusive growth process going in the county, marketing a more inviting climate to these groups should be a leading priority. This is my basic thesis, and I think that probably there's general agreement about this sort of approach, but I'm really trying to emphasize the demographic angle, because that is so fundamental. It isn't just about creating jobs. It isn't just about getting people with high incomes to come here and live and spend their money. It's really about the demographics. Building a more complete demographic for the sake of a self-sustaining economy in the county. Now, how do you do it, okay? It's not easy. Why is it not easy? Because if it were easy, then I would just say, okay, everybody in the room who's absent, would you please raise your hand? And then I'm going to go around and give you a questionnaire about why you're absent. I mean, you can't do that, right? The problem is that these people aren't with us. They're not here. So it's actually pretty challenging to figure out who is eligible and who would be the ones to bring here. There are two ways you can do it, okay? The first one is to just investigate the data and try to infer where the constraints are. What is it that would be preventing groups like this or constraining them from coming here, right? Why did we get this demographic in the first place? I'm going to do that today. The second approach is aspiration. That is, you decide what kind of people you want to recruit and then go after them. And that's what I'm recommending that you guys do from tomorrow onward. I know you're already doing it, by the way, but let's try to redouble the commitment to that. But let me talk now about what I've learned by looking at data, because that's kind of what I do for a living. One of the fundamental things I learned, and very important actually, is that it's not about jobs. This county has plenty of jobs for its demographic. It's not like a lot of non-metropolitan communities where there's a scarcity of jobs and people are leaving because they can't find jobs. Nevada County is lucky in this sense. And the way you can see this absolutely in the official data for the state. And what you see is, first of all, Nevada County has relatively low labor force participation. That means because the state has been blue there, right? Across, now I've got to put on my real academic eyes here. This is by education level, and it doesn't make that much difference. These facts are true across all those groups, which is important because you also have a diverse labor market here, relatively diverse. But for the state as a whole, labor force participation is higher on average, and that's consistent with the relatively large retirement community here, and also informal activity. And I'm not just talking about boutique horticulture, I'm talking about other things. Like the gig economy and self-employment. So for that reason, it's not at all surprising that labor force participation is lower in Nevada County on average than it is for the state of California. But here's the interesting part. Employment rates are higher than average for California. So for those who actually are looking for jobs and want to work and can work and are working, those rates are higher. So there are more than an average number of jobs in Nevada County compared to the state as a whole. And for that reason, it isn't really about a jobs deficiency. I'm saying it's a demographic deficit, but it's not a jobs deficit. And that's a very good sign, but it also implies different strategies are needed to address the migration question. But you can employ people if you can get them here. And also, promoting more investment will bring more jobs, but there are already jobs here. So it's not like trying to fix Detroit. That's what I'm basically telling you, okay? So how do you attract new professionals? Well, if you offer the right jobs and the right lifestyle. That's the general agreement of human resources people all over the world, but particularly in the sought-after categories like technology. People want technology workers because they're educated and they make significantly more than the average amount of money. They're also at the early demographic stage, which makes them extremely attractive to residential communities. But if you want to attract those people, just look to the sector, and you'll see what they do in order to get them. There was a significant, a relatively large survey of entrepreneurs I'll talk about in a minute, which basically just made this point, that it's about the lifestyle. It's about the lifestyle. Matt, do you know what's up here? Is that? I should hit do what? I'm a Mac guy, so sorry. There we go. Just do this with the back. Yeah, okay, cool. All right, there we go. All right. So the barriers to mobility, to bringing young professionals, attracting young professionals, this movement thing, basically what I found looking at the data is it's a result of two things. One is the cost of living in a relative sense, okay? We know that it's much cheaper to live here than it is to live in the Bay Area. But I'm going to talk a little bit in a different way about costs. And then also lack of choice. And I mean something specific by that too. So let me go on and I'll explain. First of all, how much does a house cost in California? Wow. This is the ratio of median home price to median income. Nationally is the red line, okay? It's about three to four times median income. And California. Now, of course, we all know this because we live in California. But you probably didn't know that Nevada County is right up there. Now, why is that? Because everybody says, well, you know, homes are a lot cheaper in Nevada County than they are in the Bay or they are in LA. Yes, somewhat, but per capita median income is also lower. So in fact, housing is not that affordable for the median worker. And that means there's crowding out going on. That people who are in that median category may be prevented from migrating here just because they can't enter the residential housing market. Now that's a price constraint, but we also know that there are quantity constraints, meaning it's hard to get a house, even if you have the money to buy a house. And there's a very eloquent writer on this subject and the challenges associated with it, who is sitting next to me at the table. Your own, Mary Owens, has written a whole stream of articles about this challenge, and it turns out she's absolutely right. I mean, I came at this from a completely different direction by looking at data, and I came to essentially the same conclusion. So first of all, let's note that there's nothing special about Nevada County in terms of affordability of housing, really, on an average basis compared to the rest of the state. It would be nice. It's a beautiful place to live, but it doesn't look cheap to the average Californian. Still, it's cheaper than the places you might want to recruit from, but the momentum of migration is driven from the center of society. And so if we seem to be constrained for people coming in, that could be one of the reasons. A more important reason, a more interesting reason, has to do with lack of choice. Not the cost, but the lack of choice. What do I mean by that? Well, only 28% of Nevada County residents are renting. The state average is almost 50%. Now, as I say, you know, you could see that as a badge of honor in an ownership society. We have high ownership rates. We're proud of that. Our people are prosperous and secure. That's not what you're seeing there. You're seeing a critical shortage of rental property. Because most of the missing rental property is not at the low end. It's at the high end. And this means that there's a structural issue with the real estate and property markets that's actually creating a barrier to entry for people that are right in that threshold of affordability. They might be able to afford an apartment, a good apartment, but they're not yet ready to commit to a house. They can't find one in the area. The rental rates are literally half, not the price rate, but the occupancy rates are half of the state average in California. And as I said, most of the missing tenants are in the upper income categories, the professional categories, not the low end renting. So this is a real gap that needs to be addressed. Why is it like this? Read Mary. She explains it all. It's about a whole alphabet soup of regulations which have been opportunistically exploited by individual interest groups and have really seriously restricted the rate of growth of occupiable, either rental or homeowner real estate. Since the ownership costs are basically at the state average, you would expect to see the same balance, but we don't see that at all. What we see is a really serious imbalance, which means that large numbers of potential residents are being crowded out by a lack of affordable choice, particularly in the rental market, which is a classic transitional market. When new migrants would come, they normally rent. They don't just walk in and buy a new home and settle down in a homestead, right? So that mobility group is much more sensitive to the scarcity of rental properties than any other group. All right, so how do we break down the barriers to these choices? Because as I said, it's a problem of choice, that migrants don't have the same choices in Nevada County that they have in other parts of the state. So I've already mentioned this a whole alphabet soup, as I said, of regulations, environmental, zoning, tax regulations have been taken advantage of. They've been taken to court. They've done all kinds of things to basically stop the development process. I'm not a gonzo developer. I come from Berkeley. I mean, it's almost impossible to build something new in Berkeley. But I know when it's important to deliver residential real estate, and it's important to any society that wants diversity and especially that wants renewal, right? So this has led to adverse community outcomes, and a lot has been written about this, as I said, very eloquently by Mary and others. But obviously, it looks like more literacy and action are needed to solve the problem, because it hasn't been solved, even though the problem, I think, now should be relatively obvious. Politically, of course, it can be challenging, but this is for the good of the larger community. So there's a really significant impetus, I hope, of the public interest in this area. You don't have to wait for the regulations to change. You don't have to wait for significant public official action on this. You can start the process right now by dispelling a very common fallacy, which is NIMBY, not in my backyard. That somehow your life will be better if you can exclude other people from sharing this, whatever it is that you're enjoying, right? This is a name in economics. It's called the fallacy of composition. What it means is that something that is individually good for you is not good if everybody in society practices it. So imagine, you stand up in the movie theater, you're going to see better, right? If everybody did that, it wouldn't make any difference. You just get tired a lot sooner. So this is the dilemma. And the NIMBY mindset originates, I think, in a very authentic sensibility. That is privacy. There's nothing wrong with privacy. Don't get me wrong. I think privacy is great. And it's fine for families and even neighborhoods. But it's protected legally, actually, right? Since the Constitution, in fact. But exclusion doesn't work at the community level. And the reason is that it's very fragmenting to societies. And it basically leads to incomplete labor markets and essentially instability. Instability because it's hard to get all the goods and services you need to make a fully functioning local economy. And I think this message about NIMBY maybe for your neighborhood or your home, but not for the whole community, that needs to be better understood. Because there are a lot of relatively self-righteous movements out there that are trying to say, you know, we'll never go, we're not going to Californicate Oregon, or we're not going to do this or this. This is not about ideology. It's about economic fundamentals and the importance of diversity in a functional way. It's not about, you know, I heard the R word, rainbow. It's a wonderful concept, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about structural diversity. People who do different things, because we need them all. We need the cobblers to make the shoes, right? We need the fisher women to catch the fish. We need all of those different skills in a diverse community. And to do that, we got to open it up so that they have access to the housing market and all the other services that are needed to secure their presence here. All right, so that's the first one. Now, let me talk about commercial policies that would help to facilitate this, but I won't come back to it, but the demographic deficit, I'm telling you, that is the biggest, I see it as the biggest structural challenge for the economy. And as I said, it's not about politics, it's not about ethnicity, it's not about any of the social aspects of diversity, it's about functionality, it's about the structural problem of economic diversity. All right, so I'll talk about 3 sectors just as examples of where we could maybe really promote more open policies that are more inviting to outside capital and to outside workers of the, quote, kind you want, the model migrants, whatever you want to call them, people with relatively high education skill levels that you want to build a civil society on. You can be selective if you want to. The main thing is to look for productivity and people that are going to contribute. So I'll take 3 very generic categories and begin with agriculture. They're not the only ones, but they cover a lot of the ground. Agriculture is all over the state. It doesn't get enough credit most of the time, although it has a lot of political clout. There are all these numbers that are touted at 4% of the gross state product, et cetera, et cetera. Agriculture is so much bigger than that. And if you want to understand it, all you've got to do is to go to agricultural regions that have done the right thing, which is to exploit their products to build an entire service economy around it. And they do that through some strategies that I'm going to talk about next, which is how to promote investments in higher value products and agri-food services, not just growing stuff. Bless the farmers. The farmers must do what they do and let them do it. You know, it's a glorious calling. But that's only the starting point in terms of the economic potential of agriculture. So let's see how much further you can take it. Wine is a fantastic example, and I'm going to bear down on that. It's one of my favorite subjects. It's in Nevada County, all I can say about wine is more and more better, ever better. Just make more wine and make better wine. The wine is good. I've had some very good wine in the county, but there's no limit. pretty much to how far you can go with this. You've got a fantastic Mediterranean climate here, and you can produce the best wines that are produced by Italians, Spaniards, and even the French, right? So let's see about that. And I'll talk a little bit more about wine in a minute. Now I come to the next one, right? This is great. Here's the bottom line. I know this is sensitive for some people, but I don't partake myself, but I'm always surprised to learn about people very close to me who do. And it's what it is, all right? But the bottom line is, whether you like it or not, it's essential for the county to get around and get in front of this thing. Because as my 16-year-old daughter once said at the dinner table, you can probably imagine the context, she said, "Papa, denial is not a river in Africa, it's much closer to home." Okay, so yeah, that's not going to help to just be in denial about this thing when it's a emerging multi-billion-dollar industry, right? So the question is, how do you come to terms with it? And I would say that's the emotional aspect of that is between you and your spirit, whatever it is. But economically, it's obvious. You got to make sure that this sector pays its way, that you take full advantage of it as an entrepreneurial activity, and just don't let it slip away if it has economic potential, to the extent that you're willing to coexist with it. That's really up to you, as a community. But it has huge economic potential, and it's here. So if it's here already, make sure that in terms of local resources and services, and especially taxation, that it pays its own way. And denial is not going to help you there, because you'll be missing what's actually going on. That's been going on for a long time. All right. Well, another category is higher value farming of every kind. That includes organics, the more obvious categories, but also specialty products. And I'm talking about specialty. This means things that represent very high levels of investment in quality. And great examples of that are the cheese industry that's emerged on the Pacific Northwest coast. Gulf Humboldt Fog cheese, it's amazing. I mean, that's a completely European standard for fermented cheese. It's a fantastic cheese. And this is just, it's made out of milk. It's not that complicated. Except, no, seriously. What the difference is that the artisanship that goes into it makes all the difference. It's like beer. I mean, beer is a very simple chemical process. Wine, grape juice. In the new world, like California, you have to add yeast. You don't even do that in the old world because the yeast is already on the grapes. You just squish them and they start fermenting right away. So these are easy products, but what makes them valuable is what the artisans, the craftspeople, the investors who are investing themselves and investing money put into it. So the result is, one of my favorite examples is the mighty Watsonville strawberry. It is like the world's leading strawberry. And it's sought after all over the world now, and you can see it in the real estate market. Farmland in Watsonville, strawberry farmland is $75,000 an acre. Sonoma is $150,000 an acre. Napa, forget about it, right? Why is this happening? It's all grape juice, and berries. It's because of quality and brands. Nevada County could do exactly the same thing, but you've got to invest in the brands and invest in the quality. Add the value. It's more than grape juice. The potential is there. So how do you do it? Well, basically, if you want higher value agri-food, it's the same story, and it's been around for a long time. Branding. You've got to develop brands that are identifiable. What do brands do? They send a message to consumers. And if the message is the right message, they will pay more for that product than they will for the one without the brand. Now, you can use lots of other mechanisms, and I know you're already doing some of this stuff in the county, but do more of it. More co-ops, more fairs, support associations, subsidize them, convene them. Do whatever you can to bring producers together, because there are huge network benefits to them from doing that. And sometimes they'll do it themselves, and sometimes they just are stubborn and dig in, and they won't. But do what you can to infuse more networking into these groups. For example, I'll come back to cannabis for just a second, all right? One thing that legalization has done is it's hugely increased the communication across this sector and the technology sharing that's going on. And the innovation is accelerating really fast. That can happen in any system of, let's say, atomistic producers like farming. If you can get them together, it helps a lot. But meanwhile, let me remind you, this is not a new idea. This idea of branding was invented 200 years ago by the French. and they used it to basically brand wine and certify the brand, so that if the label says this, that tells you who made it, where it came from, and you can believe that. And a credible brand does what? It doesn't actually improve quality all by itself. What it does is it protects the identity of the producer, so they have an incentive to invest in quality because they can recover the cost of that investment. If you don't know where the wine comes from, you're not going to pay more for it. But if you do know, then the producer may decide that they want to take the high road. And as long as the brand is credible and protected, they'll be rewarded for that. So we have 2 bottles of wine sitting on the table. They look exactly alike, 2 bottles of red wine with the labels taken off. One costs $5, one costs $500. Why is that? It's all because of this. Because of 100 years, 200 years of investments by producers in Bordeaux who made the investments because they were protected by a credible brand that sent a very simple message of quality. So these can be applied to any products, any ag products. Localized wine, localized standards for wine. As long as the branding is credible, you can get extra value for it. And so don't be producing $5 wine, even $50 wine. Just keep pushing it up with credible systems of branding and communication to go with the branding, the marketing to support that. All right, the technology sector. This is one of my favorites. And what's happening in technology right now is really interesting because you know all the stories about modern technology in California. We're the incubator, one of the leading incubators in the world, probably still the leading incubator in both hard and software. But we're entering a new age of technology where technology is becoming, the technology sector, the enterprises are becoming mobile. And in the past, they weren't that mobile. They were densely packed in specific areas like Silicon Valley first, and then the Silicon Gulch, and these areas where the connectivity, physical connectivity and interaction was really, really important. That's going away now. It's really changing because of communication technologies that are available. So firms are becoming segmented. They're using more telecommuting labor. My wife works for a prominent software company, and she tells me that about 30% of the staff are not on the premises at any given time during working hours because they're either telecommuting or they're with clients. But it doesn't matter because they're at every meeting. They just log on to meetings. And she said another 30% won't even walk 50 feet down the hall to attend a meeting. They just log in. So this new technology, and believe me, they're still productive because their employers allow them to do all this, but it's a different paradigm for location. And what it means is that these firms are actually highly mobile. They can send individual workers almost anywhere, but they can modularize teams and send groups of 50, 500, they can establish an office that's physically completely independent, but totally wired into their overall system. And that didn't happen before. So when an economist sees that kind of situation where the costs of linkage really go down, they know that there's going to be what we call spatial arbitrage. That is, that they'll be looking for new locations on the basis of other conditions. And the condition that you guys have the most to gain from is quality of life. And affordability, really. For that sector, they can afford it. They can afford to live here. So average staff settlement costs and maintenance costs in the Bay Area are much higher than they are here, as I'm sure you're well aware. But I'd really like to see the county promote itself as a second-tier technology hub. Meaning that's not where the really big companies will have their headquarters, but they can create modular units in the county and be wired in. And you want that because those are the people that can really contribute to the demographic transition for Nevada County. So turn it into an arrival, from a departure lounge into an arrival hall. Bring that category of worker, because they're the most productive workers by value terms in the state. Knowledge, I mean, California's story, right? That the superior growth rate of California over the last 2 generations has been driven by one thing: knowledge-intensive industries. IT, biotech, maybe clean and green technology will be the next one. But this is what it's been about. It's been about highly skilled, knowledge-intensive employment. That's where the real momentum of the California economy comes from. And you can bring that right to the Nevada County community if you have the right strategies for promoting migration. Above average income, above average education, the things to look for. All right, in the technology sector, though, there's one binding constraint, and that is IT infrastructure. You got to have it. You absolutely got to have it. I mean, for you to invite Google to set up a unit in Nevada City without broadband, I mean, like continuous T1 fiber optic broadband, would be like asking Boeing to build a factory here without an airport. I'm sorry, they just won't even consider it because they can't afford to. These companies, as I say, are made of innovation. That's what really constitutes them. Everything they do is about information, internally, externally, and it only works for them to talk about the idea of relocation if this is available. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but then the next step is to actually be proactive. And I know you're doing a lot of this already, but redouble that effort and target that effort to the groups that you're interested in, being mindful of what their needs are. It should always be working in this way, but I think to be competitive, particularly for attracting knowledge-intensive workers, you're going to have to look really closely at the ecosystems that they live in and the needs that they have. And this IT thing, the infrastructure thing, is one of the crucial ones. I'll talk, as I said, I'll talk more about the IT in a second, but let me get to the last category, the generic category, which is tourism. The thing to remember about tourism is that it's not just a source of income and fun and everything else, but it's actually a billboard for the region. So it's a way for you to advertise what it's like to live here. And to do that, I think, and expand it, the basic objective should be, maybe it's a little bit like agriculture in a sense, you want to more fully leverage the resources around the county, make sure that tourism is exploiting every potential opportunity, particularly as winter sports begin to suffer from climate change. I mean, they're investing a lot in snow machines right now, and last year we had a good snow, but believe me, warm weather sports are going to become the prevailing phenomenon, and that should, I hope, offer partnerships between East and West Nevada County to basically syndicate recreation across the entire county. When my kids were little, I used to love the Immigrant Basin because you can go up there and go across maybe a dozen lakes without going up more than 200 feet, in elevation. It's really good for small children. Accessibility is fantastic in that region, and you could literally integrate those things with new forms of mobility, like mountain bikes and some road building. But I think those opportunities still, as I say, leverage more resources. And also increase visitor value. The ways to do that are through the way that you market, decide who you actually want as your target audience. People that spend more money, let's face it, that's what tourism can do. It's a one-time opportunity. Make sure that people leave as much money on the table as possible during their visit. Diversifying service opportunities, that's just a part of the whole business plan. But diversity is a great thing if you want to enlarge the potential audience of visitors. Here's another category, and I want to emphasize it very strongly. That's enterprise tourism. That is getting businesses to come and visit because they bring their whole cohorts with them, and they also, in a way, in the back of their minds, will be replaying this idea of, well, I wonder what it would be like to be located here. My workers seem happy. We're doing this stuff. And that will be on everybody's lips when they're attending things like retreats, conferences. You can provide special incentives for employers. Obviously, you want to comp the CEOs, but beyond that, you can provide special incentives. Get the hospitality industry into this game. Please, reach out to them because they can really help. And not just the hospitality industry that's living here right now, but those who can send people through tour operations. Again, branding, Hallmark sporting events, you've already got many of them, I know, but keep going. Get as many branded events as possible associated with this place, particularly as they have media, because the media, again, is just going to be your billboard. Get on the GPA circuit. I don't care what you do, but just try to get into syndicated sporting activities. Wimbledon is just a tiny little place in England. It's not that fancy, right? But it's a brand, and because it's a brand, it's attracting millions and millions of dollars every year for tennis games. So I don't know how to do it. I'm not saying I'm an expert in this, but I know exactly what the result can be if you can succeed at branding hallmark events like this, particularly if they're linked to media, because then the media will do your public relations work for you. Generally speaking, this category of so-called public-private partnerships is usually underdeveloped in almost every community. You guys have got a really good dialogue going. I know there are many representatives of both public and private in this room. Please keep talking to each other and figure out ways to do it. But don't just stop with the local public officials. Please talk to the state, talk to the feds. What I said about the immigrant basin, that's about the feds, you know. There was I can't remember the name of this guy, but a brilliant entrepreneur who started the mountain biking craze up in Downeyville. Well, how did he do that? He realized that 100 years ago, the federal government had built logging roads all over that area in order to clear out all the trees. Trees are back now, right? But the logging roads are still there. And he said, my God, this is a mountain biking paradise, courtesy of the taxpayers of the 1920s. So those are the kinds of insights that can get you going. Leverage federal resources, leverage state resources, and let them help you to build out the recreational economy in the county. All right, in terms of public goods and services, let me come back to this issue, because this is what the local governments really have to be determined to commit to. And the private sector can help them, but they really shouldn't be called upon to do it themselves. And the reason is something called the commitment game. The commitment game is about why you build infrastructure. You do it because firms need the government to commit and incur the expensive fixed costs to reduce risk and reduce the cost of getting into business. Industrial parks are a classic example, but so are highways. This is a commitment to lower costs for everybody of doing business and engaging in economic activity. And the county, I know you're very dedicated to maintaining the quality of existing infrastructure, but information infrastructure, I'm sorry, you really got to keep pushing in this direction if you want to attract knowledge-intensive activities. In a way, I mean, I know there's some really talented technology firms already in the area, but don't let that deceive you, all right? These firms are actually, they're quite unique, and they're relatively quite self-reliant by the standards of technology companies. Many of them are founder-based, and there's a really good review of them, 2015, 2016, by a woman, I can't remember her name, but there's a nice sort of bio of all the technology companies around here, and they're solid companies, but they're a little bit unique by the standards of the general technology industry, and to meet those guys' needs, they're very connected, and they've got to have this infrastructure. So let me talk about what you can do to get closer to that. Information technology. All right, I told you about my wife's workplace, but internet, come on, everybody. This is it. You know, this is what I say to when I walk into a hotel. I say, wait a second, this is the new hot water. I mean, you don't have internet? Or you're going to make me pay for it? Are you kidding? Right? This is infrastructure, and infrastructure benefits everybody, even if they're not using it, because it increases productivity. So it's for everybody, everywhere, and it needs to be available to everybody, everywhere. It really does. It's like drinking water in today's economy. You've got to deal with media companies because they want to charge you for access, and there was an attempt to have free internet in San Francisco. Free, you know, just open internet, like streetlights, but it was defeated by the media companies. And Google even offered to dumb it down to speeds below video, but it was still defeated. But you don't have to make it free, okay? There's a problem with that economically because you'll get free ridership and there are other problems. But I think the priorities for this should be relatively easy to fulfill. And you could be an incubator for this. That would be a model for communities all over the United States. Don't ask me about other places because Korea is already way ahead of us, and many other countries are way ahead of us in terms of internet access. So if you want to do it, think of Nevada County as an incubator, and I hope you'll do that in every context that I'm mentioning today, because this is really a great opportunity. You've got a smart community, a well-educated community, and you can set standards for the rest of the state. So what are the priorities? The first one is first-tier speed, bandwidth, and continuity. I mean, absolutely industrial-grade internet. And as I said, you will not be able to attract first-tier technology companies until you've got that. You can't do it. I mean, I gave a talk 2 years ago at Google headquarters in San Francisco, And I walked in, just as a little anecdote, which will tell you how embedded these people are in broadband. They escorted me into the room. It was a conference room with a pretty typical conference table, like 20 seats at an oval table. But it was a little bit unusual because the walls were completely white. And so I felt a little bit, is this like interrogation or something? It seemed a bit strange. And as I was setting up, one of the walls lit up, and there was a room full of life-size people who were actually in the campus in Mountain View. And then a few minutes later, another wall lit up, and that was another room full of people. These people were in New York, Google's offices in New York City. And so there were suddenly like 70 people in the room. And they were like really there, it wasn't holographic, but they were just like sitting there, the whole wall. And so the room, how mirrors make rooms seem bigger? Suddenly I was looking out over the Hudson River. I was looking out over the bay, even though there were no windows in the room. And I said to the guy, I said, oh, well, about 60 people, that's pretty good attendance. And he said to me, there are currently 340 people on the feed right now. And at the end of the week, he sent me an audit of the video feed, and over 1,200 people had watched the presentation. And on the audit, there was a little histogram that showed when they rewound and where they, you could say back 5 seconds, back 10 seconds if you want to hear a point again. So he said, these are the important things you said. But this just shows you how deeply embedded these technologies are in the communication culture of these firms. They can't live without it. I mean, they just couldn't function without that, right? As compared to having 20 people drive up from Mountain View to attend a thing. No way. But this is one thing that's not going to be negotiable. It'll be a screening mechanism for recruiting for first-tier technology companies. Okay, also affordability. These are social issues for me, affordability and community content. Affordability, I advocate free internet, but only up to a point. I would say give everybody an hour's free internet every day. That'll make parents' lives much easier and cheaper. But I think free internet is an entitlement nowadays. It really is, because it's knowledge. This is about education, and it's a backbone for knowledge. Now, people might use it for bad purposes, but that's not our business, right? We're a First Amendment country, so that's their business. But the access thing should be universal because we all benefit from an educated population. Secondly, or thirdly, actually, community content. Fortunately, Nevada County is doing pretty well there. I watch UBNet all the time, especially during the fire season. So I know that there are a lot of activists that are trying to promote domestic and local content, and I encourage you to just keep doing that because this medium is here for you. It's for community awareness, community social networking, right? These kinds of technologies should be localized. They don't need to be in the hands of Facebook. They can be in local hands to achieve really important social ends. Now, the last thing that I really advocate in terms of the sort of innovation side and something that would really change the living circumstances around here is the recognition of the changes in mobility that are happening right now driven by technology. I'm not going to talk about autonomous vehicles, although that's a big deal too. But as you know, the private transport system and the public transportation system too are being profoundly disrupted, particularly the public transit system and the private transit, meaning the taxi systems. And consumers are going crazy for this. I don't know what it's like here, but in the Bay, people are finding all kinds of ways to use Uber, Lyft, all these others, and even delivery services. This is all part of a new culture of decentralized, privatized mobility. And frankly, when I look at the balance sheets for the Gold Country stage, it looks a lot like some other local bus systems. It's a very laudable mission, don't get me wrong. I think mobility is essential for people. I know it is, and I think they should be entitled to it. But there may be much more cost-effective ways to deliver that. And also ways that are actually more inclusive. Remember that the new mobility, like Lyft, is door-to-door. If you're a disabled senior, you need either paratransit or you need somebody who's going to chauffeur you. You're not going to make it to the bus stop and back or make it to 2 bus stops and back. So public transit is kind of an approximation of what the need of meeting the needs. But economically, I was a little startled when I looked at the costs. And if you want to talk to these companies about being an incubator, and I think Nevada County would be a fantastic incubator for these kinds of new mobility solutions, talk to them directly. Negotiate directly with Uber. Negotiate directly with with companies that are providing decentralized services for private transport, and you could solve some important problems. The drunk driving, there's a fantastic service in Korea, which is like Uber, except there are 2 people in the car. Because unfortunately, Korea is blessed with one of the highest rates of alcoholism in the world. They have a big problem with the risk of drunk driving. But you can pick up the phone and call this service. They'll come with 2 people, and one will take you home, and the other will bring your car and follow you home. I mean, that is so simple, right? It is so simple. Honestly. So, easy solution, it's been there all the time. It could have been done very easily. But now the technologies for communication and location have completely transformed it and made it feasible. So I'd really encourage you to think about ways to do this. You don't have to get rid of the bus system, but you could complement it in a really strong and positive way by doing this. And believe me, if you get into things like subsidizing clean vehicle, ride sharing, then the state will help you pay for it. There's a thing called the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, something that I've worked on for the Air Resources Board. And they're spending the proceeds of the auction revenues, $2 billion a year right now for selling pollution permits. They're spending it on clean energy projects and clean air projects. Anytime you can prove that you're mitigating emissions, you're eligible for significant amounts of money, or you could be. So I would suggest come up with a clean air, new mobility solution for the county, and the state might foot a significant part of the bill. And also, you get the branding, you get to be the incubator for these things, which is a really positive and burnishing effect. Okay, I'm running out of time, but I want to touch on the community marketing. Do I have time to do that just for a minute? Okay, thank you for bearing with me. I know you still got a little bit of dessert left, so dig in. I'm not a marketing expert, but I do know that even if you sell gold, something that's really desirable, you can make a lot more money if you sell it wisely and promote it. So there are 5 essential components to community marketing. The first one is to have a plan. I know you guys have got plans, but I'm going to ask you to go back to the drawing board and rethink a plan, just for the sake of, evaluating your assumptions and the opportunities. Because new technology is a new game. It's not the old school of business associations, Rotary, et cetera, Lions Club. Those are wonderful organizations. They've done great things for local economies and especially for society. But that is old school. I've got to be honest with you. The entrepreneurs I'm talking about don't play that, okay? They have a different way of assessing opportunities and making their choices. The next thing, and this is the most important, is to have a simple, universal message in all of the marketing you do for the community. And this is only a suggestion, okay? Telling the people want to live here in Nevada County. It could be any variation on that theme. But as I told you in an earlier slide, a survey of 250 leading technology entrepreneurs, asking them, how do you recruit people successfully, competitively? They all basically said the same thing in different ways. They said, we're paying over the nose. Everybody pays. That's why these guys are so sought after. But the one thing that can make you competitive is to put them in a place where they want to live. It's not the money. We're paying way too much money to them already, or the benefits, or the free lunch and everything else, the cafeterias and everything else. Okay, second approach, the message, just work on it and burnish it and make it simple but easy to communicate. It's part of the brand. And a brand, if you're lucky, it'll become a verb, like to Xerox, right? Or it'll become an idiom, like to Google. You may not get that far with Yuba Gold, but believe me, Yuba Gold is going to be coming up as a brand very soon. But it's like, that just it's been lying on the shelf for 170 years, so since Sutter's Mill. So now somebody's going to capitalize on it, believe me. Anyhow, the message just got to be simple and universal. I'm loving it. I don't care what you say. Companies agonize over this. Just find your message and promote it. Then go after firms, not individuals. You can broadcast individuals. That's a great idea, and you will do as a part of the tourism objective and a few of the others I'm going to talk about. But the basic fact is that creating jobs is expensive and it's quite risky. So don't do that. Let the entrepreneurs do it. Create an environment which is attractive to those people, and they will assume the risks of bringing their own people there or the people that you want. Have a dedicated sales force for this. I can't emphasize the importance of making individuals responsible and compensating them for success in this recruiting activity. This isn't a big thing to do, actually. It'll be hard work, but I'm talking about 100 companies, maybe 200 companies. You'll run out after that. You know, if you do a good job, you'll get plenty of takers. This is a beautiful place that you live in. This can happen if you send the right messages to those people. So it's not a huge community, and I think 2 salespeople could make the personal trips around the state individually in a year. So try it. You know, it's a big experiment, but I think it's well worth it. If they're well organized and they got the messages right, it'll happen. And then you need credible budget commitment because it's an investment. I'll talk about that in a second, maybe, if we have time. But the strategic plan itself, you guys you've got a great organization in the ERC. I've seen many local organizations, and this one is really robust. I can see that. So I'm sure that you've thought through all these things, but let's just think through them one more time with the 3 messages. To get the message and embed it in all local branding so that everybody's singing the same tune. To mobilize every local stakeholder that you think is relevant to attracting the right kinds of people. And then market the message through every channel you've got, especially the advanced modern media. You want to live here is the message. Here's the survey I told you about. Anybody anywhere can spend money to recruit people, but the people who get the most talent are offering the best location, the most attractive place to live. How do you get the message out? You can go after firms, as I've said. You know, you can use branding. You can use your stakeholders to network for you. And then leverage modern social media. You know, you can win presidential elections with that stuff. So make it work for you, you know, and please don't hire the Russians to do it for you. Just like, let's get this thing to work for the local community and get effective marketing through these channels. Because this is where these guys are looking. You'll see this in a second. There's a really interesting national survey about how the message comes across to people. A nationwide survey that asked to rate sources of information that might influence your perceptions of a community. That is, you know, do you like a place? How do you feel about it? Number 1 was I went there, and I liked it. That's how I discovered the Middle Yuba. I just was driving from, like, Sierraville. I took a wrong turn in Truckee, and I ended up on 49 with my wife, and it was just like, wow, this is really beautiful down here, you know? That was it. Word of mouth, very important. But then modern media, internet searches, online news sites. So tourism plus modern media, you're going to capture most of the channels that you need. Does it matter who you are in terms of the sources? These are 2 different, quite different age groups. It turns out that it really doesn't. They're all looking in the same places. They're looking at their experience from travel. They're looking at internet. That's where they look, and that's where they get the messages, regardless of whether they're young or old anymore. Everybody's using this stuff now. Okay, dedicated sales force, I already talked about this. Please just hire people and give them incentive compensation. I mean, real income, real income. I think the idea would be to have a team of 2, but they go out individually, but they work together and share everything. And one paid by the private sector, one paid by the public sector. So they're representing the 2 main constituencies. Okay, but you've got to court the firms directly. In this business, you've got to go talk to them. They're not going to get this from the back of The Economist magazine or Newsweek or whatever they're reading. They want this because you're talking about their own future. So they need to have personalized messages to make this work. Okay, that's the good news. Now, here's the hard part, which is how do we pay for all this? And I'm going to make this really brief because it's not the sweet part of the fruit here. But clearly, the private sector can bear its fair share, but there's a very compelling case for the public sector to take leadership in this because it's an infrastructure question, I think, in terms of the real make or break aspect of this. This is already a wonderful place to live, but if you don't deliver the IT infrastructure that you need, the technology sector is not going to respond. So I really hope that that the public sector can do it. Should they do it through borrowing, or should they do it through the T word? That's an interesting question. But I'm going to talk about this because there's another reason to think about the risks ahead. And that's because if winter comes, meaning a recession, Nevada County's got to be ready. We've already seen that there's a really strong contention between the state and the counties in terms of revenue, fiscal issues. And when things get bad for the state, they get much worse for the counties because the state's got bargaining power. Let me show you what's happened to the tax situation. Now, this is a real economist talking, so let's take this seriously, please. Here's the state's fiscal resources from 1950 to now. Look at what's happened. They're almost completely dependent on income tax. And it's even scarier now, okay? Ready? Completely dependent on income tax, and who pays that tax? Some of you in this room know this, but not all of you. Because the top 1% of taxpayers pay almost half of the state's income tax. Now, that is a very thin edge to balance on. And what that means is if we get into an adverse cycle, if winter comes again, and it does, you know, and so you want to be ready for fiscal, what we call in economics, what we call fiscal rivalry. That is two tax collecting entities that are fighting over the same revenue. So as an insurance policy, this is my last slide, and obviously I'm not running for office. In fact, I probably will be running for the door in a minute, but this is my technical opinion. I'm not a politician, but I think you should raise taxes in the county. They're low by state standards. They absolutely are low. And mainly retail. And those newcomers are going to pay a bigger share of that, by the way, but sorry, you need resources because you've got to invest now, and you also need to insure against winter, against the prospect of this. Bay Area sales taxes are like nosebleed, right? But still, Nevada County is below average, and they've got plenty of headroom if they want to do it. You know, Nevada City's already gone up a bit above Grass Valley, but still, the average is low. So if you want public resources for the right reasons, then you've got access to fiscal resources. And you may need them, not just for investment, which I would strongly advocate to correct all the structural problems I've been talking about, but also because I'm a little bit concerned about the future of the fiscal future of the counties, because I know the state is going to hit the wall if there's a recession or if the market takes a significant tick. And of course, we can ask Mary about that. She foresees things. She's got those uncanny sensibilities of a great investor, a nose for opportunity and a keen eye for trouble coming. And that's how she identified the housing problem that I simply rediscovered in the data. But I think both for optimism, that is to build more opportunities for the county, particularly in infrastructure, but also as a cautionary move, this is something to consider. Sorry to end on a sour note, but I'm happy to ask questions about happy topics and boring topics too. Okay, thank you.